I have reviewed a lot of sales calls these last few months, and the same thing keeps showing up. Now, the sales rep typically misses this, and the person who trained them will miss it. But once you actually know what to look for, it's impossible to miss. There's 3 patterns that I've seen pop up over and over again, and they all stem from the same underlying thing, but they show up differently. Pattern number 1 is what I call the energy shift. We all know the calls that seem to feel really good, right? There's a good flow to them. We've built great rapport. Everything seems to be clicking, and then all of a sudden something changes. Something shifts underneath the surface, and we typically don't know what that is. We can't put our finger on it. The prospect doesn't have words for it, but they feel it. They feel a disconnection. An example of this might be where the sales rep asks a question, and instead of listening to the answer, they're replaying what they need to say next in their head. And so instead of addressing the answer to the question they just asked, they just go to the next step of the script. And what that signals to the prospect is that the sales rep doesn't really care. They're disconnected. They don't really care. They're just trying to get a sale. It can completely lose any trust that you've built over the course of that call. Pattern number 2 that I see is what I call the feature dump pattern. There's a lot of reasons for feature dumping, but a lot of times it'll show up when reps aren't very confident in themselves, they're not very confident in their offer, or more often than not, they just didn't do a good enough job in the discovery process. If they had, they would have been able to uncover the different problems, the pain points, ideal outcomes of the customer, and then tie their offer back into things that are extremely relevant for them. But instead, they skip that part. Then they're stuck just feature dumping, listing off all the things that they think are cool about their offer that may or may not even be relevant to the person in front of them. Once again, losing trust with the customer. Now, pattern number 3 is all about the close. And this could look like rushing the close, or it could look like avoiding it entirely. Now, rushing the close would be not doing the discovery process hardly at all, and just getting to the point where they want to ask for money because that's the awkward part and they're trying to get it over with as quickly as possible. And so this would look like not really digging deep for pain, not really even touching on outcome, getting to the point where they ask for the sale and then all of a sudden having to overcome a million objections because these things weren't covered when they should have earlier in the call. The best way to avoid having to handle a lot of objections at the end of a call is to go deep in the discovery process and pre-handle anything that might come up. Now, the avoidance of the close is something different entirely. This is where you actually go too deep in the discovery process. You ask too many questions and you let the prospect take control of the call and start talking about things that aren't relevant to anything that you're there for. Now, it may feel good for them in the moment to get things off their chest and to have someone to listen to them and talk through things that they don't normally get to talk through, but ultimately it's not serving anyone. And what you're doing is just delaying the inevitable. You're trying to avoid this perceived awkward moment where you're asking for the sale at the end. Sometimes you don't even ask for the sale. Sometimes you just have this preconceived notion in your head that this person's not going to buy, so you're just going to forego the pain of rejection and not even ask. Or maybe you just wait for them to bring it up. No matter which pattern is showing up for you, it all stems from the same underlying thing. It's what I call the shadow rep. It's the second rep that's living inside of you that you didn't choose, you didn't train, you didn't hire, but they've been there since you were a kid. These programs that were built and wired into us before we had a say in the matter. And they were built for safety. They were built to keep us safe in danger, in threatening situations. And they worked as kids. But they don't work now, and they have no business showing up on your sales call 20 years later, sabotaging things and keeping you from putting food on the table. Now, you've probably spent a lot of time and money, sales trainings, hiring coaches, memorizing scripts, and let alone the time and the money, you've probably spent a lot of stress and had a lot of frustration around why things aren't working for you, even though you're doing everything quote unquote right. The problem is sales training doesn't talk about this stuff. And if it does, it's very surface level, and maybe it mentions inner work or something generic like that. But until you address these underlying programs, until you expose your shadow rep and then rewire it in the right way, everything's going to be harder than it needs to be. These things will still pop up no matter how much practice you put in. That's why it's so important to address this stuff. That way, the sales training that you do have and all the practice that you put in actually works when it counts. So I want to help you expose your shadow rep. I want to help you rewire these programs. I built a tool that you can use for free. It's linked below. It'll help get you started. It'll start showing you the patterns underneath that are popping up and costing you deals. Because we can't rewire what we can't see. First step is to see it and name it, and then we can work with it. So check it out. Let me know what you think in the comments. Peace.